All right, aloha.
Aloha.
Mai ka'ino. Welcome to our presentation that we call Tales of the Goddesses. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the goddesses in general to begin with, and then talk about them individually, at least a certain number. And then we're going to tell stories. We're all going to tell stories, okay? And we'll see how that works, so that you can get a deeper sense of what they're all about and how Hawaiian legends work. When we talk about Hawaiian goddesses, these are unlike any other goddesses in the world. And to start off with, we need to have an understanding of the whole word for god and goddess. There's only one word in Hawaiian, and it's a tricky word, because it means a lot more things. The word is Akua. So this is how the translator has been translated into God or goddess. And it's a difficult translation, because this word really is usually refers to a very powerful spirit, and yet not always, because depending on the context, the same word can mean a slave. The same word can refer to a high chief. It can refer to usually the invisible force behind some kind of influence. So in the earliest dictionary, there was a comment that this word is difficult to understand. And the reason why is it can be applied to so many things. Hawaiians apply it to the swirl of water when you push a paddle on a canoe. They apply it to the movement of a watch, you know, when the second hand goes around and the minute hand and all those. That's an Akua. So it's like some invisible force behind events, behind lots of things. Most commonly, although it was applied to powerful chiefs, they could be called Akua, that didn't mean the Hawaiians did not think they were human. Didn't mean that at all. One of the applications was when Captain Cook came. And of course, Captain Cook was called an Akua. He was obviously a very powerful chief. And when you hear the Western stories of his arrival in these islands, then you say, well, they thought he was a god. But they're thinking Western terms, which means a supernatural being, and that they killed him when they discovered that he was not a god. No, that's not what it was all about at all. They killed him because he made some really bad social errors, okay, really bad ones. And so got some people, the Hawaiians, very upset, and finally a scuffle broke out, and he was killed probably pretty much by accident. But he was on shore, and he was trying to take the king on board his ship as a hostage, because somebody had stolen a boat. And anyway, the king was an untouchable. You didn't touch the king, okay? Lèse majesté, they used to call it in Europe. You don't touch the king. And anyway, Cook got in trouble for that. But he was called an Akua because he was obviously a powerful chief. Most often, however, Akua refers to the forces of nature and all different manner and aspects of the forces of nature. These are called Akua. And it's generally the invisible side of that, the force behind the force, so to speak. So it's not like a spirit that's in something, but it is the invisible force that's within something, that's motivating it, that's moving it, that's causing things to happen. That's Akua. So that's one way in which these elements of nature, these gods and goddesses, are different. So we're going to mainly talk goddesses. The other way in which they are different is from North American, South American, Australian, European, Middle Eastern gods and goddesses, is that they're often not related at all. Now, when you're used to Greek gods who belong to the Olympian family or the Titan family, then this is kind of difficult to understand. Or the Norse gods in Northern Europe, where they were divided into two. The Hawaiian gods and goddesses, according to some of the researchers, probably came to these islands at different times with different families. When we start studying, almost all of them, in all of their stories, came to the islands. The first one we're going to talk about, there's no idea that she came to the islands, except maybe from under the water. But almost all of them came here from some place. So this is one of the unique characteristics of the Hawaiian goddesses. And also, like I said, they're not all related. Sometimes you'll find certain goddesses incorporated into the stories of later goddesses. And sometimes they'll be completely ignored. As an example, in Pele stories, Pele the volcano goddess, they've incorporated a goddess who was once a separate goddess entirely, Kapo, that we will talk about, but they ignore Hina, who's one of the oldest ones. Okay? Totally ignored. Nothing about her in any Pele stories. Okay? Like she doesn't exist. And yet we know Pele came later. So it's another kind of curiosity about the gods and goddesses. Here's another one. They are not, how can I put it? They are not stuck with a particular place. For instance, there's no god or goddess of Kauai. There's no goddess of Kauai. There's no goddess of Maui or Molokai or Big Island. There are goddesses associated with Pele, for instance, is the volcano goddess. But that's only because that's where the molten lava is. She could be anywhere that there's molten lava. Right? So they don't have goddesses that are in charge of a particular location. In fact, they're not really in charge of anything. Okay? So it's not a kind of a hierarchical system like that at all. Nobody's the boss and gives orders to the others. Pele's a little bossy, but so maybe I'd have to take that back. But doesn't really tell them how to do their job. It's more like that. Okay? Now, with this kind of understanding, when we start talking about the goddesses, why are we talking about the goddesses in particular? First of all, it's a great subject. Second of all, in old Hawaii, goddesses held a special place. Not just because of what they represented, but because of the way that they were connected with and contacted. For instance, men or women, whenever there was channeling, which sometimes could be spontaneous and sometimes could be on purpose, the channeling was always for channeling a goddess. The gods weren't channeled. Okay? The male gods weren't channeled. Only the female goddesses were channeled. Nobody knows why it was that way, but they had that kind of a special position in the esoteric practices in these islands. Okay? So, and we're only going to talk about 7. There were lots and lots of them, all over the place. We're going to talk about 7 of the most prominent and important. But there was the goddess of the rainbow, Anuenui, which is also the name for the rainbow. We're not going to talk about her. Okay? And we're not going to talk about goddesses associated with lots of other things. We're going to talk about the seven of the most important ones.